Once again, welcome to this iteration of the China Goes Global Forum. And without further ado, I just wanted to say thanks to our board members who are here, John, Francisco, Winqian, Christoph, Ilan. William Wei was unable to be here, and our Georgia Tech colleague, Jim Hoadley, as well. And to those of you who have participated over the years, you know that we have been putting this on for, I think, 17 years now. And it's a great pleasure to continue to do this in spite of all our challenges. In the absence of our moderator there, let me ask John if you, since you are old friends with Xiaoming, if you would give him the introduction he so well deserves.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to introduce Xiaoming Li, who is known to most of us in the United States and elsewhere. He's been at Old Dominion University many years in the business school. I view him as a crossover between disciplines, able to address issues of China with mastery, not only from a business standpoint, speaking to relevant actors in the US, Europe, Asia, about doing business in China, but also understanding the deep political economy that characterizes the evolution of the Chinese state, and particularly its Communist Party institution. He's a distinguished scholar. He is here to talk about one of his many writings. He is definitely a voice to be listened to. As the proverb goes, when he speaks, people listen. We're here to do that today. I've not introduced myself. I'm John McIntyre. I'm no China expert, but I've followed China since I was a teenager. That's just a few months ago. And I've seen the evolution of the party. I've seen the evolution of the economy, of the polity. And I have been disturbed lately, particularly in the last 5-6 years, by the turn of events in which China and the US are now in what many call a confrontational mode. While there are so many opportunities to do good and to address the commons, the global commons that is our mutual and common heritage, we are maybe traveling different roads. So Xiaoming Li from Old Dominion University, formerly from China with deep roots and knowledge, I call upon you to enlighten us and share with us your wisdom.
Thank you,
John. Thanks, John, for your great introduction. I'm humbled by that. And also, thanks for the board, John, Ilan, Julian, and Christoph, and Winqian, all of you. And so glad to see all the friends, old and new, here. Especially, we have people from Europe today. My talk is based on a book I recently published, in which I argue that China, its economy and society, under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, has evolved into a giant corporation. So that's the theme. The conventional thinking about and the terminology we use to describe China's economy, such as state-centered economy, state-centered capitalism, are not accurate or useful in helping us understand its the state of China and formulate policies dealing with it. So that's that is my theme. And right now, the party is about to hold its 20th National Congress. So our discussion couldn't be more timely. The world is focusing on Xi Jinping, whether he will continue to be the party leader. And there seems to be a strong consensus that he should step down. But the reason is he is not doing. He causes many issues, but the moderate section of the party, they hope to remove Xi to save the party. Why do analysts or observers, let's say in the democratic world, also have the same hope to save the party? Or So that is the issue that I hope we can touch upon today, later when we have time. But my theme actually is behind this, is closely related to this issue. Is that Xi or the party? Is there a drastic turn of the party 4 or 5 years ago, like Zhang mentioned, or it's just a continuation of the party all along? It's a matter of speed or method to that. So that kind of leads us to the perspectives of on China research. There is what I call a China-centric view, namely, focus on China or from China. What can we do to best help China to rise? There, in this view, probably actually within this view, there a great debate. The people who think China should rely purely on market, like Zhang Weiying or Weiying Zhang, or another, the opposite, led by Justin Lin Yifu. He said, no, the state should play a central role, and it's all about the state. And in the West, we have the engagement view, which I will touch later. And there is the view from the other countries. I used to be a China-centric view earlier, but now I live in the United States. I looked at China's rise from the United States, maybe interest. What does China's rise affect? How does that affect the United States? So in China's research, people say there are doves, there are hawks. But Andrew Nathan of Columbia University, a prominent scholar in China study, he said there are very few doves today, and many people are leaning towards hawkish to look at China. And it's an interesting turn. We remember in 1989 when the Tiananmen massacre occurred. I talked to people in DC, the think tanks or policymakers. Their question was, what can we do to change China? How can we democratize China? But fast forward today, the question becomes, what can we do to protect ourselves from China's influence? So the perspective has changed quite drastically. There's a common, well, there's a prevalent view, a common wisdom, conventional wisdom is that Xi has deviated from Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping, what is his major point? I kind of summarize 3 points. The first one is uphold the party's monopoly. Keep the party's absolute rule. His second key point is be practical. His famous argument of white cat versus black cat, no matter whatever the color, as long as it catches mice, it's a good cat. So he's open to learn from capitalism. And his third key point that people like to talk about is he used the Chinese idiom, hide our claws and build our strength, or bide our time, different interpretation. And this little statue, he's sat on the red sofa, meaning he's still communist. So don't label him as a true capitalism. And of course, he has his pair of slippers symbolizing or promoting his view. So look at the 3 points. Which one does Xi deviate from? Actually, Xi has not deviated from any of them. Xi overemphasized party's leadership. Xi, all along, is very opportunistic or practical. And the third point, she just felt, okay, now it's time to show our class because our GDP based on purchasing power parity is bigger than the U.S. So it's just a matter of time, not different from that. And let's talk about the engagement view. Years when China was about to begin its economic reform in the, let's say, in the late 90s, early 2000s, we have this engagement argument, I think, heralded by then the U.S. President Bill Clinton. He said, let's engage with China, although it's a communist country. But guess what? When if we help them to develop the economy, when the economy develops, people get wealthy, and there will be a middle class emerging. And based on the history of Europe's democratization, like the bourgeoisie or middle class played the central role in demanding democracy. As Bertin Moore argued famously, no bourgeoisie, no democracy. And the political scholars even calculated the threshold where worldwide democracy will emerge, $6,000 per capita income. So based on the engagement view, the whole world, especially the democratic world, began to do business with China, provide the capital, technology, and indeed, China has a rapid economic growth as we know it, and a huge middle class emerged. But democracy is ever elusive, nowhere to be seen. So what went wrong with this engagement view? Why bourgeoisie, the middle class, do not play a role as they played in Europe? The key answer to that is the Communist Party's absolute control. The control is comprehensive from birth, from cradle to grave. That is very appropriate. My good friend Jie Chen, also colleague, he wrote a book called A Middle Class Without Democracy, which kind of summarizes very accurately. Some examples of the party's control. Now, to start a business in China, it's not like a automatic approval, automatic registration as we have here. It's if someone who is not on the good terms with the party, you probably wouldn't get approved. And for instance, just take the rules of naming a company in China. You cannot freely name your company. For instance, the terms such as China, Chinese, all those terms are properties of the party. You cannot use them. Only large firms centrally reporting to the central government can use those terms. And tax authorities can automatically access companies' bank accounts. And now, for many firms, the CCP would have a branch in the company. So that is how we start the company. Another kind of an interesting phenomenon or evidence of this state control is China's stock market. All the brokerage firms in China, I interviewed a few, they said there's a term called 窗口指导, guidance at the window or window guidance. Actually, recently, the term is better known because there are reports that the CCP gave window guidance to brokerage firms, telling them, make sure the market does not fluctuate before the party's Congress. So the Chinese stock market is it's not really a market. It's more like a state coffer, state financial department. Well, okay. The specifically the window guidance in general is if the market is too high, the regulator will call the brokerage firm that don't buy, try to sell to cool down the market, or vice versa if the market is too low. We all probably still remember some cases of heavy interference in private firms. Ant Group, which is founded by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, is probably the largest fintech firm in the world, having more than 5 million, 6 million users. So it had it's supposed to have a CPO, an IPO a couple years ago, and but right before the IPO, Jack Ma made fun of the party in the speech. It's kind of a light-hearted sarcasm about party's regulation, but that infuriated the party. It's also a good opportunity to teach him a lesson. So they just took off the IPO days before that, which is the largest in Asia. Didi, the ride-hailing company, it kind of secretly listed in New York stock exchange in the U.S. It did not violate any rules, but it didn't really explicitly apply for permission from the party. And the fate, as we all know, is delisting. Those heavy-handed interference were criticized by the world. You know, Xi or the CCP is destroying their own business. Why does government do that? Well, to me, it's a process of learning how to govern, how to show the private firm that your boss is not the market, your boss is the CCP. And that is my interpretation. So that leads me to this argument that the party has transformed the whole country, the economy, into a giant corporation. And here I want to go into a little bit of a theoretical development for my argument. Okay. I want to show that, for instance, here I want to show the Chinese state-owned enterprises are not firms, but they're more like a business unit of the party. So I want to compare the difference between firms and business units within a firm. Essentially, the latter does not have all the independence or autonomy as firms. Okay. As you can see, in terms of independence or the specific rights of the firm, and they can use it, but you cannot. The managers cannot profit just without party's approval, well, unless they steal from that. And if you look at the state-owned enterprises in China, they are much closer. They resemble business units rather than independent firms. So that is one of my dimensions, one of the dimensions of my theoretical development. And also I look at citizens versus employees. Yeah. Citizens enjoy a lot more rights, a lot more independence than employees of a firm. When we work for a firm, we have to give up certain rights to be there. Those are very straightforward to understand. Those you don't the things that you kind of have to give up when you become an employee rather than a citizen. You look at residents in China. Note here, I don't want to call Chinese residents as citizens because they don't really have many rights that citizens of democratic countries entitle. But if you look at all the dimensions, they resemble employees in the firm. They do not have complete freedom to choose where they live, and others' rights are also you have to give up to live there. So this is my one of my key arguments. And the people in China, they're like employees of the gigantic firm. Another dimension I look at is market versus hierarchy. This is a classic debate in the theory of the firm. We ask the question, why do firms exist? Why can't we just as individuals deal with the market? So why does a firm do certain things internally and farm out other things to the market? I'll give you a good example to understand market versus a firm or hierarchy using, let's say, publication business. If I publish hard printed material, I have a choice of owning my own printing shop, or I can subcontract to a printing firm to print. How do I make this decision? It depends on the nature of my business. If I have a daily newspaper, I need to have last minute change. I need to, because the news is fast, and I need to have complete control over the printing firm. So I will own it. I will have a shop. On the other hand, if I'm a book publisher, I publish books that is not time sensitive. I don't have to have the headache of owning a printing shop, so I will farm it out. So that is the decision between hierarchy versus market. Within the hierarchy, you have authority, you have complete ownership, and you're the boss, so you have very good coordination. Of course, the cost of owning it is bureaucracy, agency cost. Right? The printing shop may become the manager there may have an empire building mentality, so the cost may be high. On the other hand, market is very efficient because of the signal of the price. Look at China. Now, China again resembles a firm, the hierarchy rather than market. The party has absolute authority, de facto ownership, and a very efficient coordination. Of course, it comes with the cost of being a strong hierarchy. So this kind of drives to the point that the party actually runs China as a corporation. Here's how I view it. The party's leadership is actually the board, and Xi Jinping is the CEO. The party leader can be the CEO. The functional departments, the government agencies, ministries, they function just like a functional department of a firm. For instance, the Ministry of United Front Work, that's a party organ. They have the job of identifying investment opportunities overseas, even look for partners for Chinese firms. The Ministry of State Security, which is a combined FBI with CIA, or in the US, they collect information for the state, but they also help private firms to collect information. As I said, state-owned enterprises, they're like business units. They're firms that have close relations with the state. A good example may be Huawei. So they act more like a subsidiary of the China Inc. Private firms is like a joint venture with the party having controlling share. Recall Ant Group. Alibaba's case or Didi. The party said the party's thing is the final thing. They are the controlling shareholder, de facto shareholder. Foreign firms enjoy more freedom, but they have to operate under good relations with the party. They're kind of a franchisees, with a license granted to them, from the party, and the party can take away some anytime. I like this picture to show China Inc. The party leader Xi Jinping is inspecting a factory. He acts like a CEO, and the hierarchy is very clear. Look at their clothes. You can immediately tell who are the cadres of the party, who are the workers. Their hands gesture are the same, very uniform. So, from an organizational structure perspective, we can have two dimensions. One is party's control. Party's control has benefits. The more control, the more benefit. So the benefit of the privilege from the party is positively correlated with the control. Sliding scale, foreign firms, they have the least control and the least privilege. Another way to look at that is to compare with a democratic society. In a democracy, the rule of law governs everything, including all the branches of the government, including the president, all the firms, all the individuals. And in China, that role, the rule of law, is replaced by the rule of the party. The party includes everything. This is becoming more and more clear. As Xi Jinping said, the party leads every sphere of the society. Even the government is under the party. Party is bigger than the government, and the firms and the individuals. So, in sum, as I said in the book, living, working, doing business in China are not rights, but privileges granted by the party. So based on this kind of, if the whole country is a corporation, China's industrial policy is more hands-on, more active than industrial policies as we know from market economy, which is a loose guidance. Here's how it works. First, the party will identify some key industries, and based on that, they'll say, okay, we're going to protect those industries from foreign competition, and then acquire necessary technology and mobilize all the resources in the country to develop it. Once you kind of protect the market, the advantage of China is it's huge. So within the country, that protected industry can have a huge market to quickly grow the scale and to lower the unit cost. As we know, the unit cost is a function of the market economy of scale. And once they become a very efficient producer, will go out and dominate the world market. So it's more like a corporate strategy rather than a government policy. Now, I will quickly go over 3 industries that follow this strategy. The EV battery. China was a late starter, but due to the help of the state and the way they run it, acquire technology, protect the market, and order domestic, order any producers in China or to use China-made batteries. Now, this company, CATL, becomes the largest producer in the world, and China is having more than 60% of the market share. Solar panel, this is a very familiar story. Again, China started rather late, but quickly become the dominant player with state help. Now, After first it's protected, and now the protection is removed, but China become a very efficient producer because it has lower standards of environmental protection. The cost is a quarter of the cost that we can produce. High-speed rail, a very similar story. China started in 2004, and the strategy is market for technology. For all the leading players, if they want to have share of the market, they have to share technology. And now China has the first model, Hexie, is based on borrowed technology. But second one, Fuxing, is claimed to have all the Chinese technology. Now, again, the whole world depends on CRRC for their railroad equipment. Interestingly, just right before this upcoming party's Congress, there's a article about what is China's economy. They have some very revolutionary terms they call the people's economy, but some identified 5 key elements. The 5 key elements they identified are an efficient market, safe planning, active government, and ability to mobilize the whole country to do one thing, and a well-organized population. And when I look at this, this is exactly what I talk about in my book. I don't think, they may have read a Chinese description of my book, but this shows the China-centric researchers or policymakers have kind of informally recognized they are running the country as a giant corporation. What are the advantages of this China Inc.? The advantage is it is a state and a firm. So in state affairs, the Chinese state can act like a firm. Recall the trade negotiation several years ago. During the trade negotiation, the Chinese position is, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to buy this. That, the US said really cannot deliver like that, because the US government is in no position to buy anything. It has to, purchasing has to go through private firms, and they may or may not follow these orders. But the Chinese state can promise to buy the quantity of grain. Why does the state need grain? Ultimately, it's a firm that process grain to sell food will buy that. So that is evidence that they can be as agile as a firm. And in firm competition, the Chinese firms can act like a state, like Huawei. What is Huawei's budget? Huawei's budget is a state budget, almost unlimited. And another kind of advantage is China Inc. is de facto. It's never on paper, so it's very flexible. Why should we care about a country that runs a society or economy as a state? Because size matters. China is too big. So when China does runs the economy that way, the effect is unprecedented. I want to show some numbers. Look at this number. Now the media still calls the second largest economy. That's wrong. China is not the second largest economy. It is the largest economy based on purchasing power, which is a more accurate measure than nominal GDP. Another number I want you to look at is how much GDP is under state control. The U.S. federal government controls 30%, something like that. And that 30% the bulk of it is defense and the social welfare, social service. The discretionary is very little. So the U.S. government has very little power in deciding what to do with the budget. And in China, virtually, there's a very low social welfare. Defense is big, and internal stability maintenance is big, but the government has a lot of latitude, a lot of discretionary power in spending. Yeah, that's my last point. So that makes the whole world concerned why China's way of running the economy is an issue. Okay, I made this like a visualizing the world market and all the countries and their firms are competing in this market. Circles are firms, squares are states. So the role of the national government, the squares, they, Douglas North, the institutional theory guru, he would argue states are the judges, are the referees, and the firms are the players. That's the institutional argument. Although we argue they're not really impartial judges. States may be biased towards their own firm, but even though they're still not players. I use octagon to symbolize China Inc. and the subsidiaries players from China. They're between firm and the state. When they need to act like a state, they're a state. If they need to act like a firm, they will be firm. So they are flexible and powerful. How can other regular firms compete with this giant octagon? So that is the question. A background why China has to run like that is I look at from a political perspective. Here's China's the CCP's dilemma. On the one hand, it wants to keep China open because it needs the goods, the market, technology, investment. But on the other hand, they would rather see China closed because ideas that may trouble the regime, the ideas that may threaten the regime will come in if the door remains open to the bad. So far, it kind of try to tell the Chinese don't learn the bad, don't learn the ideas from other countries. Examples like Liu Xiaobo, we know that case. He died in prison. His crime is to write about it, to express his ideas. And Dr. Li Wenliang, the whistleblower for COVID, he was criticized, reprimanded by the party. And another kind of party insider, Ren Zhiqiang, a moderate, he criticized Xi, and he is sentenced 18 years recently in jail. So those are the party's way of controlling the bad. But this is not a very good model. Even the party knows it. So given that the party cannot keep China closed, what are the options? One option is just to keep status quo, keep kind of scare people, don't criticize it. If you do it, you will be in jail, or try to filter foreign influence by controlling, we know, the Great Firewall. Another way is, well, embrace the universal value, embrace democracy. We know that is not the party wants to do. Another one is, well, we cannot close it, and then let's change the world. Try to co-opt the world not to criticize China. Try to make them more friendly or look the other way about, or maybe even embrace the Chinese way. So that is so far the CCP has been doing. So the question to the world facing this model is, how can we coexist with China Inc. 10, 20, 30 years from now? Or should we ask China Inc. to change? Time-wise, it's I am a little bit pessimistic because we know that China Inc. is very competitive, and in the long run, it may have a higher growth rate than the rest of the world, especially in the developed world. So it's probably in the world's best interest to ask China to change from the China Inc. way. So China versus the democracies, who needs whom more? I kind of laid out 4 simple combinations. So democracies without China, or dictatorships, they trade between themselves, or a trade between a democracy and a dictatorship, which is today, or a dictatorship closes its door. Democracies trading between, they can mutually benefit. That is very easy to understand. Dictatorships, they cannot really benefit a lot by trading. They tend to fight each other. The trade between democracy and the dictatorship, that is actually the best model for a dictatorship like China. They can bribe the democracy and get technologies either legally or illegally. What happens if a dictatorship closes its door? Well, China's Cultural Revolution years ago is a good example. They will degenerate into an infight if it's closed. So that is why China, even the CCP realizes, and the CCP's position is the U.S. is protectionism. The U.S. is closing. We're open. We want to open world because a closed economy like China's is not very desirable. So my kind of a simple conclusion is China needs democracies more than vice versa. Of course, that is with a strong condition. That is, all the democracies have to act in uniform, have a kind of a consistent policy dealing with China. Can they do it? Okay. Should the democracy demand China to change? So here's a kind of a decision tree or game map. If we don't do it, China will be eventually become dominant in the world. That is not in the best interest of the world. Okay. So if we say yes, it can be costly because China may, the CCP may retaliate or backlash. So the question, if we demand China to change, will China change? When option is yes, that's great. That is the best, for the world. And that actually ultimately depend on the Chinese people. The outside world can only help. If China refuses, if the CCP refuses to change, there may be some political repression if China becomes more isolated. But that may put more pressure into the party, so the party will, from here, to change there. And I see that as a possibility. If the democratic world begin to use delinking as a as a weapon, as a tool to pressure China to change, we may get somewhere toward that direction. That is kind of to me, is maybe the best option. So I did a very simple cost-benefit analysis for different policies or scenarios for the U.S. Here's a status quo, no change. And I look at some major sectors of the U.S. economy or U.S. society, and I will assign a negative 2 points or a positive 2 points or neutral for status quo. The overall sum is -4. If China becomes more isolated, if U.S. has a more kind of a decoupling policy, we have some positive, some negative, there are some changes. And the overall sum is slightly positive. Of course, if China embraces rule of law in the long run, it will be really positive for the U.S. So that is a simple kind of a game play out. Okay. I will stop here, and thank you for your patience, and I would love to hear your feedback and comments.
Yes, Xiaomin, thank you very much. This is Christoph Lattemann. We met each other. Sorry for coming late into this conference. I had some technical problems. This still can happen after 2 years of Corona. It's amazing. But thank you very much for your interesting talk and the introduction to your China Inc. ideas. We have today 2 discussants. One is sorry, Professor Doris Fisher, and the other one is, you know him already, Dr. John McIntyre. I will introduce very briefly both discussants before they start. So our first discussant today is Professor Dr. Doris Fisher. Since 2012, so 10 years, since 10 years, Doris holds the chair of China Business and Economics at the University of Würzburg here in Germany. She is also Vice President of Internationalization and Alumni at her university. She is the co-editor of the academic book series China, Politics and Economics, published by Nomos. Her most recent publications are on China corporate credit report systems in regulation and governance in 2022 and industrial policies under Xi Jinping, published in the journal Issues and Studies in 2021. So her current research makes her a perfect match and discussant on the topic on China Inc., as she studied the role of the China's Communist Party in various social and business contexts. So yeah, Doris, welcome. And I give you the floor, but before that, I will introduce as well John, who is next to your discussion. Dr. John McIntyre, you probably all know him, is the founding director of the Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business and the Center for International Business Education and Research, the Cyber Center, that is a National Center of Excellence since 1993. And he is a full professor of International Business Management, International Relations, with courtesy appointments in the College of Management and this, at the Sumnon School of International Affairs of the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. His latest China-related publications, together with Francesca Spigaretti, who will take part as well today, is A New China Dream, a book published with Palgrave Macmillan in 2021. Okay, so we have 2 very well-educated and knowledgeable discussants. So I will give over the floor to Doris.
Oh, thanks, Christoph. And first of all, thanks for having me in this interesting session and also for giving me the opportunity to comment on the book. It's a rich book, and so this is actually not an easy one because, I mean, in a way, we also have the role, obviously, to maybe formulate some criticism. Otherwise, I mean, if I just laud the book, it would be a bit, well, would not be so interesting, probably. First of all, nevertheless, I would like to do this and say my compliments, because a lot of the issues in the book reflect affecting the party system from a business perspective resonates with, first of all, other books that have come out recently. I think there is a trend now to have a more critical perspective on how the government and business relations in China have evolved over the past, especially the party. I mean, you all know probably the book of Red Roulette by Desmond Shum, which also kind of gave us another perspective on, or kind of in-depth perspective on the relationship between the party and the business. And I agree with a lot of things that are written in the book, so it was really a pleasure to read it. And I just named a few because it's actually so much that has been addressed in the book that it anyway would not be possible to talk about everything. So I think one specific idea that I can only kind of support is this: the importance or the dilemma of a relation-based economy in the context of globalization. That's now something that you have not stressed so much in your presentation, so excuse me for going, but you have this idea that how guanxi is both a good thing but also a problem for in an international relationship. And Christoph just mentioned our research on the social credit system and credit reporting, and I believe very much that the whole idea of the social credit system is one of the ideas, at least by the party, to overcome the problems that come with this relationship-based economy. I also agree with your assessment that the party has a very strong role in steering the economy. I mean, this is not so surprising with all the discussions that we currently have around the 20th Party Congress, but we actually have, in the context of our industrial policy research, introduced the concept of steering, which is, there is a theory about steering in German literature. So another point on which I, of course, agree is the importance overall of industrial policies and how this, and I also found it very interesting how this is embedded in the book. Also, the idea of describing the different players in the economy as subsidiaries and joint ventures, and so is very fascinating. Though maybe in detail I'm not always agreeing. I also appreciate support the idea that there is a need for Western countries, whatever Western countries that is, or democracies, to coordinate in their attempts to somehow deal with China, which is a point at the end of the book. And I fully agree, and actually that's something that I often use as a beginning of my lectures, or especially lectures to a more general public, that, and you mentioned that in the presentation, that size matters. I will come back to that point specifically. I have some points of, well, wouldn't say necessarily criticism, but where I don't necessarily agree with you, and sometimes it's a bit detailed, and it's not, again, only linked to the presentation, or maybe not even mainly linked to the presentation. I found that overall there is one question that we are, I think, somehow, I mean, you mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, is it Xi has changed thing, or is it a long-term development of the party, and kind of has it been there all the time? I agree that, yes, it has been somehow there all the time, but what I lack is the discussions within the party, first of all, and also the differences in development. I mean, the leeway that has been there for different developments in different provinces over the past, but especially the dissent or kind of the changes also within the party. I mean, even though you could say it's a long-term strategy of the party, it has been there, and that it's kind of, there's a long-term plan. In a way, of course, they always wanted to protect the party's power, but the approaches have changed over time. I mean, maybe I should mention that I'm first time I visited China as a student for 2 years was in 1987. So I was in China in 1989. So from there, I mean, you see how things have gone in different directions over time. And so this, to just write it as a continuous process, most parts of the book, I would say somehow, maybe it's necessary to tell your story of China Incorporated, but somehow I'm lacking a bit. Well, I find there is a lack of explaining how things have changed so tremendously maybe not directly once Xi Jinping came into power, but around 2015-16, which we actually also mentioned in the presentation. And that brings one thing that is missing is somehow that China is not only acting nationally, but also always in reaction to things that happen outside. And for that matter, I would argue that developments in the US, sorry to say so, we Europeans never really count when it comes to China, but the development in the US around that time also contributed to developments and decisions taken by the Chinese government. Another point quite different from this is that in one part of the book, you talk about the role of culture. And in that chapter, after reading it, I had the feeling that somehow you make a distinction between, well, the Chinese culture or the Asian culture being more or less a very good one, and then there's a bad party, and somehow using it, misusing it, corrupting it, whatever. But I found that raised the question when I read it in my head, at least, like, okay, how much is the party embedded in the culture? I mean, if you start talking about China culture, I mean, being a factor that matters, then you cannot really kind of separate the fact that we have the culture, the party, which is pretty large, from this culture. I don't have a full solution for that. Again, it's more a question, which is then related a bit to the question how you delineate the political and economic institutions from culture, because you have a long chapter on institutional economics, and where I think the interpretation is sometimes not very clear whether you think of of culture as an institution or culture being some separate. But in any case, the question is how, I mean, political institutions and economic institutions are embedded in the culture, even if you say culture is not an institution, but somehow it's linked. And I found this a bit artificial, or a bit romantic about the culture, maybe, in order to protect somehow the good culture and but be critical about the political institutions. I have a strong issue with your interpretation of Maslow. At one point, you go into Maslow, and I think, but that we should probably would. I mean, to be honest, I started rereading Maslow to find that interpretation, and I couldn't find it in his book. So I think you have this kind of poorer people are necessarily more hardworking or something like that. And this is, I can't read that from Maslow, but that's a very detailed comment. Now, when we come to industrial policies, I'd like to share two things. One is, when we did interviews in industrial policies in China some years ago, I mean, pre-corona, that's why it's always some years ago, but not that long ago. The interesting interpretation that became a part, and whenever we talked about industrial policies, there were, I would say, everybody automatically associated with solar and EV policies. That is kind of the essential idea of industrial policies also in China. But at the same time, we are confronted with, like, these are the two industrial policies that failed. So Chinese economists would say these industrial policies failed, which is quite the opposite from how you depicted. And I think in the EV sector, it was this judgment is, well, we did all this in order to become the technological leaders in electric vehicles. And well, you focus then on the batteries, but even there, I mean, well, there maybe not, but in general, in EVs, the Chinese would tell us, well, you know, we're still not the leaders in the technology. We bring the most cars on the market, but we're not at the technological frontier. So this is an interesting question on how to what industrial policies is actually about. Second, with regard to solar, you refer to the fact that there was an industrial policy coming out in 2012, and ever since the Chinese market has exploded and they became world market leader. To be honest, I have serious doubts about that, because I'm actually lecturing, I have written about this, that the industrial policy came out when the Chinese solar sector already was very successful. They already had a very large 95% market share prior to the publishing of that industrial policy. So the change of the industrial policies, and there I'm closely, very close to your analysis, is that until 2008-9, the solar industry, the producers of cells and modules and so on. That was private economy. And those cells and modules and so on were not used in China. They were completely and fully exported, more or less. It was, I sometimes do the joke that from a German perspective, it was like with Christmas decoration. Yeah, it was produced in China, but not used in China. That was because it was way too expensive to be used in China in competition to other technologies for producing electricity. And only in 2008-9 did Chinese producers manage to know how to produce purified silicon, which is a very core element for producing solar technology, and which was an oligopoly of foreign producers prior to that moment. And the Chinese had tried to get licenses and whatever, but this oligopoly never allowed the knowledge to somehow move to China. And so they had to somehow invent it. It was a very complicated process of achieving this knowledge, not stealing it in this case. And that made the prices of purified silicon go down, and eventually the technology became cheap. And then came, and you have that also in your book, the crisis in Europe, the financial crisis in Europe, and change of policies in Europe, so that the European market suddenly was no longer there. And then the Chinese solar producers would lobby the Chinese government for solutions. So suddenly they would start around 2010, well, first in 9, but then in a larger scale, 10, 11, to also use these technologies as a technology in what the solars and modules and so on, also in China. And only after that did the industrial policy come out. And why did it come out? Because at the same time, and here we are, I fully agree with you, because at that time, solar energy suddenly became an energy producing or energy relevant technology for China, and energy is a state business. So the private enterprise out took hold. But the market, you argued somehow, I felt that you argued that the industrial policy was key for the Chinese solar energy to become so successful. And I would argue no. Also, our interview partners would argue that solar industry has, the policy has also been a failure. That was especially in 2018-19, because they found that it was way too expensive. The kind of money that was flowing into subsidies was way too expensive, and also, or at least the promised money, but in fact, the government had to stop. And you have it in this May 31 policy that came out and stopped the subsidies. That was because of a failure of the scheme how to support the industry, and not so much the strategic decision that it's no longer necessary, but really the government could no longer pay the promised subsidies for them. They were in arrear for, I think, 2 years of payments already. Okay, so that's very specific about this. Maybe 2 more points.
Doris, we have another discussant.
Yes. Okay, so then I leave it. I stop here. I can stop here. No problem. I mean, this is kind of a list of things that I still have some points, but it's no matter.
Okay, so let's discuss the points probably in the discussion. Thank you very much, Doris.
Yes,
before Xiaomin, probably before you respond to the points, I would like let's hear John, his perspective. John, it's your part.
You're muted, John. John, you're muted.
John, you're still muted.
I'll be brief.
Yes,
we have 15 minutes left, and there are questions coming in. Rather than focus on the book, and I think Doris has done a very good job of identifying issues with the book, which in fact brought to my mind the fact that the book Francesca and I produced last year should have been focused on industrial policy failings rather than successes. But be it as it may, I'm going to focus on the chairman of the board of this institution that Xiaomin has called China Inc., because we are really about to re-elect the leader of 1/6 of the world, and the implications are absolutely tremendous. And a leader that will probably most likely come out much stronger than he already is going into the 20th Party Congress. And so the question that arises, how is this possible in the current political lay of the land in in China as constituted today. It's interesting to note, and I think Xiaomin may find time to comment on it, that there has been no leaks whatsoever, no information on the party Congress coming up, and no credible challenges in leadership, even token ones. So in many ways, Xi Jinping has taken credit for a number of achievements that are really pretty much present in the mind of the Chinese people. 800 million Chinese have gotten rid of poverty, and that is a big factor in the mind of the Chinese public in terms of support for a third term, raising already questions. I attended yesterday a Brookings presentation in which the question that was raised was a fourth term rather than a third term. There has been, secondly, dramatic improvements in pollution. Now you're going to say this is not very hard to do given the fact that China came from a very low point in terms of environmental issues. There has also been a noteworthy transformation of the Chinese military, using the American model of a joint force rather than a land force. And that has gone very well with that particular component of Chinese society. And also, and I think this is probably where I disagree with Xiaomin, but I would defer to him in any case when he retorts. In many ways, Xiaomin, I would say that Xi Jinping is credited with having saved the Chinese Communist Party through various anti-corruption campaigns, and more college graduates than ever seem to be going into the CCP. That had not been the case 5, 6, 7 years ago. And so what are we facing? The China of 20 years ago that was more open, the China of 10 years ago that has closed, and what can we expect from the 316 members of the Central Communist Party? And so what are the implications for China-US relations flowing out of this third term and possible fourth term? We've gone really, and this is to be lamented, from a period of really an excellent 40 years of relationship in which we all benefited from globalization. Are we going to be lamenting the fact that we have lost globalization as a result of the current state of affairs that prevails? And so where is this leading? Delinking, deglobalization, geostrategic confrontation? And are we falling in the Graham Allison's Thucydides trap? Personally, I don't think so. But there are two views prevailing in the United States, which really match up to some of your last or second to last slide. There are two views in the US. One is that we should really trade where it's possible, limiting the risks. And the other is Mike Pompeo's former Secretary of State under Trump, that has basically taken a virulently opposed position regarding the Central Communist Party of China. So these are questions that are embedded in your book that it came out about a year ago, but that have taken on a new configuration in the current light of the upcoming meeting of the Congress Party. So if you could comment on some of these issues, how you view Xi Jinping. I view it as a return to the core culture, which is a point that Doris was making, namely a highly personalistic leadership, moving away from Xiaomin's view of the mechanistic view of the party as an organ of society. In other words, we have really gone back to a leadership, the cult of personality in many ways. This is controversial, I realize, and I'm hoping that there is time for you to pick it up and respond to it.
Yeah, John, thank you very much to keep in time. So, Xiaomin, I would like to give you the chance to respond to some of these comments and criticisms, and yeah, and then I will open up the discussion for the public.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doris and John, for your comments. And Doris, your comments are very helpful for me to improve my research and address some issues in my book. I really love to maybe get your the detailed comments from email or something because we don't have all the time. I will, in view of time, I will try to be brief. Doris, one question Doris mentioned is she or is the party in the past few decades is a continuous development or there's a drastic change, which is also what John alluded to. This is probably a very key question. I have been thinking about how can we understand the party's long-term strategic goal. If we understand that, the one view is whoever deviates from that goal in the party will be removed. The history shows Hu Yaobang was removed that way, Zhao Ziyang was removed that way. And the party all along is a learning process. I can even allude to Elaine's question, is the party irrational in punishing their own IT business to lose money? That I view is part of the learning process. The party has been learning with a very clumsy way ever since the Tiananmen massacre, or even before that. How can we keep the party's rule forever? The punishment of the IT's Jack Ma is not really. Party says I'm willing to lose money or I'm willing to destroy you. No, it's just I am in control, but how I control, I have to learn. If I want to punish you, what is the degree? I don't have a good idea yet. I'm trying. To me, it's all the learning process, so in a way, it is. I would argue it still continues to achieve party's goal. Domestically, total control. Worldly, if we cannot close the door, so we have to be dominant so that we can, if we become dominant, then it will be further strengthening our domestic control. And also it's part of the communist ideology. Remember, Marx and Lenin said communism cannot achieve victory in one country. It has to be worldwide victory. We don't really know to what extent the party, the CCP still holds that view, but it's still a communist party. And Dorothy's second question, is the party embedded into the culture? I very much agree, and I like this insight. I think the cultural scholars from now on, they should recognize when we talk about Chinese culture, we should not only talk about traditional, thousands years old Confucius Chinese culture. Chinese culture has a very significant element and a continuing growing element that is the party's influence. That is part of what we political scientists call the brainwash, or it's an engineering process of engineering the mind of Chinese. So I like that point. And other points that Doris made, I think they're more technical, and I have errors in my book, and we can talk about that for the benefit of this audience. I think John's question is very timely and important. The Xi's faith, and John raised several points. And I mean, John said he kind of disagree with me that Xi should be credited for China's, or maybe the party's achievement. I agree. Actually, I may be misunderstood. I think to me, she has been doing a very great job for the party, or even for China, even with all those stumbling mistakes. Look at what is China's or the party's position in the world today. Contrary to the conventional wisdom, we read the media report, or maybe even some unofficial report from China. It's like Xi is facing tremendous resistance, and the anti-Xi critic and Xi fraction first of all, I don't even think there's an anti-Xi clique in China or a faction in China. So it comes to the perspective. When we look at Xi, the party moderates, as I said, in China. They say, okay, the zero tolerance of COVID, the destruction of IT, the destruction of several industries in China, and the rapidly shrinking of personal freedom. So Xi has to go. Think about this. Let's say, if China now, Xi steps down and a more moderate leader comes to lead the party, what is the implication of that? So does that change the party's ultimate goal, namely become a dominant role in the world and the total control of the party, total control of China? I don't think even moderate leader will change that goal. It probably will be more deceiving because the moderate leader will come and the engagement school, let's engage because China is okay now, because the party now has soft turned. So I think that is probably even more dangerous for the world. So is globalization a passé? I kind of see there will be a two camp, if we still call it a globalization, it will be two camps. Probably the democratic camp will become more united and have a more concerted policy towards China and a gradual delinking. By the way, the shifting, the migrate of supply chain from China, it takes time. I think it is taking place. And as we know, to establish a good supply chain for any industry, it takes 15 to 20 years. So we cannot really see the result yet. We cannot really say for sure, but it is happening. Look at Apple is producing iPhone 14, not only the earlier model in India now. So I foresee kind of a two-camp situation. China may have its own camp along with Russia, Iran, all the like-minded countries. But the question is this camp viable economically? I think it's not viable. I don't think a dictatorship will benefit by trading among themselves. They need technology from outside. They need management know-how. They need a lot from the democratic camp. But I would rather say this two camps competing peacefully, see which one will prevail. Maybe I will stop here and listen to some feedback.
Thanks, Xiaoming. Doris raised her hand, and then I would go over to the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to 2 points. One, first is because you mentioned at the beginning, and I referred to it, but did not elaborate, the issue of size. And now you say, what would happen if China's leadership would change to a more moderate person? But you could also argue what would happen if China changes to a free market economy, which in a way we maybe would love, and a democratic country. It would still be huge. And I think we should also have that in mind, that if China was, let's say, democratic, a liberal market economy, or let's say at least a market economy, and would prosper, we would still face a problem of China's huge market size. And I think the power question would still be in the room. I mean, in a way, it is unrealistic to expect China, whatever regime it has, to just say, okay, here's globalization, it was all there, now we are rich, and we would just merge into the rules that have been there for a long time. So I think every bigger player coming in, arising, so to speak, would argue we have interests, we have national interests, and try to influence. It's the first. The second is that due to the size of the Chinese market, assuming that you have, I mean, that all those barriers within China, because we have actually a lot of barriers between the provinces, it's not all a united market in all aspects. But if we have this market size, then China is just a very huge player. and could still easily misuse market power. And I think this is, I mean, from a really looking ahead, is a challenge. We don't have rules on the global level that are very good in limiting misuse of market power, which would be the equivalent to national laws that we have for anti-monopoly and anti-competitive behavior. But we don't really have that at the global level. We have some of it in WTO, but not really in depth, really good rules for such a situation. And so I'm sometimes wondering, I mean, this is not an excuse to say, well, the Chinese should keep the party system they have, don't get me wrong, but we could also be a bit blind, not only on the fact what happens if she leaves, but also on the question of what would happen if we really saw the change that you are suggesting somehow in your book that we would like to see. I think a lot of problems would still be there.
I'd like to pick up on that for just one quick follow-up. You cite, Chao Min, the work of Jonas Kornal, one of the leading economists looking at transition economies, particularly in Eastern Europe, and since we have Germans on board, that should ring a bell. Why did China fail in that transition in the late 80s? Is it largely due to, is your explanation the party itself controlling society, or are there other dynamics in place? Which raises the question of industrial policy, which raises the question of size, regardless of the political form. But China didn't budge. In fact, it went far more in the direction of centrally planned economies with modifications. So there was no lessons learned from the process of really transition in Eastern European economies.
Well, can I, is that to me? So I will share my thought. Longer term, I am trying to build my case that there's no internal drive or systematic way for a communist party or communist regime to democratize. If you look at the Soviet Union, even I don't think Gorbachev was intentionally trying to destroy the party. It was, to me, a very by accident thing. And the Eastern Europe, what happened is, if once Gorbachev told them that the Soviet Union will not support their regime, they kind of fall on their own. So to me, that is rather a exception. And the Chinese model shows consistently, even since Mao, whoever deviates from party's long-term goal must go. Look at Hu Yaobang. I think this panel probably should be familiar with Hu Yaobang. Under Hu Yaobang in the late 80s, that to me was the only chance. Interestingly, my father is a close aide of Hu Yaobang, so I know that part of history particularly well. To me, that was the only chance that the party may actually deviate from communism and begin to democratize. But that was quickly killed. So people thought, gee, Hu Yaobang had the chance. But to me, I personally heard Hu Yaobang said, I did this, I did all those risky changes, and I showed all the criticism from the party hardliners because I want to save the party. Even him want to save the party. Zhao Ziyang was trying to save the party. So my point is, I want to build a case. The Communist Party in China has this very stable and fixed goal. No one, I mean, Xi Jinping or whoever the leader, those come and go. Xi Jinping may go when he dies, but that doesn't matter. It's just a trial and error. They try to how to achieve that goal. Xi Jinping is not a ideocratic leader that deviates from that.
Okay, thank you, Xiaomin. We have now so first of all, we are almost reaching the end of our session here, but nevertheless, there were some questions in the chat from Julian, from Reginald, from Gianluca and Ilan. We can only pick one or two before we are ending. Julian, do you want to raise your question? Do you, so as a president of this organization who is organizing the conference?
Thank you, Christoph, for that. But I will defer to the others.
Okay.
So Xiaomin, why don't you go ahead and choose how you want to respond?
Okay, I probably still want to emphasize. John made one good point about this Thucydides trap that essentially says two global powers or two big powers cannot share, and one has to dominate. That is the kind of my understanding is the theoretical foundation of that trap, and now it is specifically used, especially used to describe a U.S.-China rivalry. But back to history, there was a UK-US rivalry, and so I think this is the trap argument missed a key point. The key point is, although we say size matters, but I think institution matters more. The different systems, that is the key. It's not that we don't want China to be bigger. It is, well, U.S. has been doing a lot to help it become bigger by giving technology, management, investment, people. But we don't want to see a dominant player that will disrupt, not playing by the rule, or even extending its long arm into our own democracy. That is what we fear, or we don't like. So I wouldn't use that as a normally just a too big power. That is one thing I would. And also, I still want to kind of ask people to change our mentality. Think about China is like you belong to one corporation or country, and then there's another like the Octane. As in my chart, Octane China Inc. is there, and the China Inc. is choosing its leader. Do you want a more moderate leader there so that the China Inc. can be stronger, can be more efficiently run? And here is, or do you care? I mean, the succession problem is the headache of every dictatorship. They don't know how to do the succession because she needs the vote of the Politburo standing members, the Politburo members, the 300-strong Central Committee members. But once they vote him on, or whoever on, into that position, that person will have absolute power over them and lock them up. Why should they vote for anyone? So that is a dilemma they can never solve. That's a classic dilemma of dictatorship. But that is not our concern. That is not my concern as an American citizen worrying about how China affects us. So my concern is China's party, society, people form, those relationships are my major concern, because those, if they keep pushing on China Inc. to the world, I will be affected. US will be affected. That is the perspective. Okay. So one more term, accelerator. You may have heard many Chinese moderates call Xi the accelerator. They think she is accelerating the demise of the party because what she is doing. So that is their perspective. Think about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Xiaomin. We are close to the end, and thank you for the insights. I think that was a nice closing remarks you already mentioned. But we have one more thing to tell you, and that will be Francesca Spigarelli, one of the members of the Chinese Globalization Association. And she's a full professor of applied economics in Macerata, and she will give you some hints about about what is over here. The China Goes Global Conference next year in 2023, and that is July 11 to 13. So, Francesca, do you want to give us some words on that?
Yes, thank you, Christoph. So we have the pleasure to announce you that next year, the China Goes Global Conference will be back in presence. So after 3 years that we don't meet, we will have the opportunity to meet again in Italy. So we have chosen this location in Europe, in Italy. We still have a couple of options. I will be the contact point for the organization in Italy with the China Center that I run. We have 2 very interesting options, but in the next weeks, the maximum by the end of October, we will release the call for paper. The tentative dates of the call for paper will be mid-March for the submission of paper. And we will have the review process as in our tradition that will be run by our colleagues. And by the end of May, early June, we will have the list of full paper accepted for the discussion in July. As you have seen, the dates are still there. So don't forget to book your agenda and to plan your visit to Italy. We have chosen these days because we have another important event in our discipline going on in Poland around July. So it will be easier for you to fly to Italy. I will give you more details in the upcoming weeks. By the end of October at the maximum, we will release the call for paper. So that you can join in presence our event. So in the last time that we met in person was, if I'm not wrong, in the US, in Orlando, with Wenshan Zhang as host. But then since then, we've been together only virtually. So it will be a big occasion in Italy, in the central part of Europe, and it will be easy to reach this destination for all of you. So stay tuned, and we will send our call for paper through our channels, Facebook, mailing list, and our social media. And I hope that you can really help us to gather people and have your scholars and colleagues and PhD students come to Italy to meet again next year. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. So great that you took the initiative or take the initiative to organize the conference next year. We're looking forward to this.
It will be in one of the oldest university in Europe. So this is what I can say. But
super. And we had already a great party, the 10 years anniversary. So we are looking forward to this. Xiaomin, thank you very much for your talk. Doris, thank you very much for your comments as well, John. Thank you all the team for China Goes Global and all those who participated here to make this happen. It's always a pleasure to meet you and to discuss with you. Time is always the limiting factor, but we should continue to do these discussions because China is still, although we have other problems right now worldwide, one of the biggest issues or biggest topics we have when it comes to globalization. Having said this, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. Looking forward to see you in Italy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you in Italy next year. Bye.
Bye.